Hello and welcome to this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. My name is Paul Geringer and I am the Extension Legal Specialist here in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. And today we're going to bring up a topic I have been getting asked to speak more and more on over the past few months. And we'll actually hopefully have a student working on some further research on it over the summer. But today, as you can tell from the episode title, we're really going to look at carbon contracts. And, as I said, this is becoming a popular topic again for ag producers around the country. And as we're going to discuss, there are a lot of legal considerations that you really need to take into consideration when you're deciding if these agreements fit your needs. And, what all do you need to negotiate in them if you have the ability to negotiate? At the same time, you got to keep in mind that this is a developing area. It's a developing area with several unknowns regarding how these agreements may actually work. We haven't seen much litigation on them, so we're still looking at how these will play out in the court system or just in how they're going to be interpreted. So with all of this, it's always good to keep in mind you really do need to seek qualified legal advice before signing any contract. So before we get started, let's talk about some basic terminology. Before discussing these terms, we really do need to think about basic terms that we're going to be seeing if we're looking at the contracts. The first term is carbon credits. Carbon credits are produced when a business or person reduces carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases. Carbon offsets occur when a person or a company purchases carbon credits to offset their carbon emissions. The best example would be an airline buys carbon credits to offset their carbon emissions from the fleet they're flying out in the field. Amazon is another company, Google, that do this. Other terms to keep in mind relate to how carbon credits would be the difference between an aggregator and a data manager. An aggregator is an individual or company pulling together agricultural operations utilizing carbon sequestering practices. So in it, a producer is going to sell carbon credits to this aggregator based on the terms in the contract, and the aggregator is going to go off and pull these together and sell them on a broader market. A data manager is an individual a producer may work with to enter the marketplace to sell carbon credits. With the data manager, this will allow the producer to control when or when not to sell, carbon credits. The other thing to think about in all of this too is the word verification. Verification is a process of evaluating the amount of greenhouse gas emissions sequestered or reduced based on implementing the new practices. In many contracts, a third-party verifier will conduct this process. So what are some contract considerations? Well, we first need to keep in mind that there are very few rules or regulations in place to protect either party in this developing market. It is in many cases the Wild West. Producers should pay attention to contract terms, ask questions when a term does not make sense, and seek legal advice from an attorney. Before entering into a contract, you should make sure you understand these key terms and get it reviewed, and if possible, by your own attorney. You should always keep in mind whoever drafted the agreement took care of themselves, and you have to pay attention and make sure it's taking care of you and negotiate when you can to get better terms put in place. The first thing you need to understand what such a contract will be paying for. If it only pays for adopting new conservation practices that could sequester carbon, and it will not pay for continuing existing practices on the agricultural land, what exactly is it paying for? If you are already utilizing no-till on your farm, for example, other practices will need to be added in order to qualify for the carbon credits. If you're looking to be paid for existing practices, then you should work with a company to get paid for these practices. Carbon contracts also typically prevent you from double rolling acres in other programs. This usually means that the practices you are adopting are not required under the terms of another program or contract. For example, if you have cropland already enrolled in this conservation reserve program, you potentially would be ineligible for a carbon contract. Again, this is something to make the company aware of early in the negotiations if you're already in another program. Payments will be based on a dollar amount per the CO2 equivalent, or CO2e, per metric ton sequestered. Companies may withhold a portion of the payment representing just a natural buffer for carbon that could potentially be lost from the soil based on a natural loss rate. For example, if the contract includes a withholding amount of 20%, then any payment is going to be reduced by 20% for that withholding factor. If the company is offering $15 per metric ton of CO2e, then the payment per metric ton would be $12 per metric ton after considering the withholding factor. Keep in mind that the contract may specify additional fees to reduce the payment rate further. For example, producers may have to pay a fee for a third-party verification cost or soil sampling, although in some cases these might be covered by the company. Producers should pay attention to additional costs which further reduce the amount paid. For more information on how payments flow through these carbon programs, I'm going to include a link into a publication out of Iowa State University that is really good at kind of showing for various carbon companies in this field how payments flow through them. Some contracts may provide an annual payment, while others may provide payments at the end of each verification period. If the contract is 10 years with a verification period every 5 years, for example, the producer would be paid after each of the two verification periods, so year 5 and year 10. Keep in mind the contract will contain provisions laying out penalties when practices cannot be implemented. For example, if weather prevents planting cover crops on the farmland, the contract penalties may apply. The contract may also contain penalties if carbon is released during the life of the contract. This release may be the fault of the producer or by accident, but it is essential to understand what the penalties are and how they could be applied depending on the situation, especially with a carbon release. Another issue to be clear on is what currency you will be paid in. From looking at sources, these carbon contracts may specify you get paid in US dollars, cryptocurrency, or credits towards future purchases. Make sure the form of payment will work for you. If you don't understand cryptocurrency, don't get paid in cryptocurrency unless you want to learn how it applies. If you want to get paid in US dollars or, a currency amount, make sure that's what you're getting paid in. Also, keep in mind data ownership issues. Carbon contracts require the producer to provide data at various intervals. That data will contain information related to soil samples and production records to help verify that the producer is adopting the practices needed. The producer needs to understand who will have access to the data provided and how that data will be maintained securely. Verifiers will utilize the data in the verification process to determine the amount of carbon sequestered is based on the agreed practices being employed. Understand how this contract is going to impact your land title and your ability to sell the property if you need to sell it. In some cases, these contracts place restrictive covenants or liens on the property to make the future buyer aware of the carbon contract on the property. It's worth paying attention to what these restrictions might be, so you understand how it could impact property if you have to sell it. So let's kind of wrap this up. There's a lot of unknowns still out there that we don't know in these contracts, but as we see more and more interest in these contracts, it's worth paying attention to the terms, asking questions of the companies presenting contracts, and seek independent legal advice. Understand the terms of the contract can help limit future disputes and allow you to better negotiate an agreement. If you have any questions on this, I will also include in a link to a presentation recently done by Shannon Farrell here at for the University of Maryland to help better explain this, and also along with someone from the U.S. House to help understand, what Congress is looking at in passing some legislation that could help allow these markets to develop. But if you have any questions, you can email me at lgoering@umd.edu. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at aglawpaul. But please, if you have questions, thoughts on future episodes, please pass them along. With that, I just want to let you know, thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.